one of the things that I'm amazed at in our culture today, and I suppose it's always been there to some extent, is the things that God gets blamed for. People will say to me, well, I don't go to church anymore because my brother died. Or I don't go to church anymore because I saw this situation in Haiti and I thought, how could a God ever, let that happen? Or I don't go to church anymore, or I don't believe in God anymore because of this or that or the other thing. It's astounding the things that God gets blamed for. And every time I hear about these things, what I realize is that the God that these people believe in or don't believe in is vastly different to the God that I have experienced and the God that I believe in. And so I think it is really, really important at times to step back and take another look at our image of God. How do we see God? What is God really like? What are the qualities of God that loom largest in your heart, in your mind, in your life? Because the way we see God has an enormous influence on our spirituality. It has an enormous influence on the way we relate with other people, and it has an enormous influence on our lives. How do you see God? One of the things I'd really encourage you to do today is sit down and just write down a list of God's qualities. What are the qualities of God that affect your image of God the most? How do you see God? How do you experience God? How have you experienced God at different times in your life? How have you seen God at different times in your life? I think it's a good exercise to sit down and say, okay, what was my image of God when I was 5 years old? What was my image of God when I was 15 years old? What was my image of God at different times in my life? How has my image of God evolved or not? Because sometimes it doesn't. And if we really take this exercise seriously, we will realize that. For better or for worse, sometimes we are hanging on to an image of God that we developed as a child or as a teenager, and that image of God is misaligned with reality. And so I do think it's very, very powerful, very, very valuable for us to step back from time to time and reassess our image of God, reassess how do we see God, how do we experience God. The reason, or one of the reasons, is because the whole idea of Christian spirituality surrounds 4 words. Thy will be done. Thy will be done. And if you think God's a tyrant, you're certainly not going to carry out his work here on earth. If you think God's a dictator, you're certainly not going to further his will by doing his will in your own place, in your own time. In order for us really to live out our Christianity, in order for us to be able to surrender to that idea of thy will be done, but surrender in a really active way, not, oh, okay, I give up, but, oh, okay, I get it, I'll surrender to that, and I will proactively, with all my effort and energy and intention, go out and try and bring about this will. In order for that, we have to have a really strong and positive image of God. And that really strong and positive image of God, even if you have it, is constantly being challenged by many voices and influences in this world. Thy will be done. I will do the will of God. That's the chant of the saints. I'll do the will of God when it's convenient and when it isn't. I'll do the will of God when it's what I want to do, and I'll do the will of God when it isn't what I want to do. I'll do the will of God when it's beneficial to me, and I'll do the will of God when it costs me something, even when those costs are unimaginable. That's the chant of the saints. That's what the saints have been doing for 2,000 years. They've been doing the will of God. They've been putting the will of God above their own self-centered interests so that other people's lives could be better, and so the world could become more and more how God imagined it for us from the beginning. And it's a beautiful thing when we see that in people's lives. I think especially in our culture that can be so caught up in, self-interest. When we see people who set that aside to the benefit of others, to the benefit of the whole world, it's attractive. Because at the end of the day, there really is nothing more attractive than holiness. There really is nothing more attractive than someone who says, yes, I will do God's work on earth in my own limited way, in my own little place. I will do whatever God wants me to do today. That's a beautiful thing.